All right, students, remember I told you that James Polk meant what he said about manifest destiny. He meant that he was going to pursue this and not just talk about it. He campaigned on it, and he had done everything up to this point to follow through on it whenever he could. Now, relations between the U.S. and Mexico were worsening over time, and that had to do with the Texas border. People who had been anti-Texas annexation had said this was going to be a problem. And sure enough, not that many years later, here it was becoming a problem. America believed, the United States believed, that the Rio Grande was the border with Mexico because there had been two treaties signed to that effect, that the Rio Grande was the border between Texas and Mexico. But for whatever reason, Mexico now was making noise that the Nueces River was the border. And so Polk became concerned about this and possibly saw it as an opportunity, but at the very least felt that he should nail down where the border was with Mexico. And so he did like other presidents before him and sent his Secretary of State to Mexico to try to buy the land from Mexico. Okay, you can see my little map here, the difference between the Rio Grande right here and the Nueces over here. It's just a little chunk of land right here, but it's very good farmland. And if you're living in this area of Mexico, that as you go progressively west, it becomes more and more desert. This little piece of farmland is important. So Polk sends John Slidell to Mexico to propose a deal of $30 million for California, because now he has many U.S. citizens living in California, and besides, after all, he does want manifest destiny. And for the New Mexico area, which again is more than just the state of New Mexico, understand that. And to recognize the Rio Grande as the Texas border. But the Mexican officials refused to even see him. Santa Anna won't even hold a meeting with Slidell. He won't even send his people to hold a meeting with Slidell. And instead, the Mexican officials insist that the Nueces is the border and are viewing any United States presence between the Nueces and the Rio Grande as an invasion. And so Polk sends Zachary Taylor and some troops down to the Rio Grande area to protect it. To protect from, in case the Mexican army should come across the border and try to raid on any U.S. people that would be living there. And so you get a battle. It's not good. The Mexican troops attack Taylor's forces and kill about a dozen U.S. soldiers. And in reality, they have killed U.S. soldiers on U.S. soil, because in reality, that's what happened. However Mexico wants to advertise it, they have signed treaties that say that the Rio Grande is the border. So Polk has no trouble whatsoever getting Congress to declare war on Mexico. There's not everybody is in agreement with this idea, but most of Congress goes along. And the fact that they have shot U.S. soldiers on U.S. soil, most people in the whole country are up in arms over it, and they're way behind Polk in his idea on this. They're supportive of him. Okay, so Polk actually does have a good plan here. He has three goals. The first is to drive the Mexican army out from between the Nueces and the Rio Grande and drive them back down into Mexico. I'm sorry, my little picture of Stephen Kearny is cut off up there. The second is to seize the New Mexico and California area. And the third is to invade the city of Mexico City. So Polk is not fooling around. This is an all-out war on Mexico. It's not a question of just reclaiming what's ours. It's now, okay, you've come and you've stirred us up, so to speak, and so now we are really going full tilt against you. Zachary Taylor is in charge of the first goal because he's the one who's already been sent to the Rio Grande. And Stephen Kearny is a young man, and he is sent out west first to Santa Fe, New Mexico, the city, and then on to California. And then Winfield Scott, will be the one to take Mexico City. When Carney gets to Santa Fe to talk to the governor and to the mayor there, the governor of Santa Fe has already fled. And when he talks to the local politicians there, they surrender without any kind of fight whatsoever, because Carney has got all those guys right outside the town. There's just no reason. They have no protection whatsoever. So, and there was the other thing too. The textbook doesn't make much about this, but understand that the other Mexican provinces, besides Texas, which had already become independent and then become part of the United States. Remember, Texas had become in revolution to Mexico because the Mexican government had denied them their rights according to the Constitution of 1821. Well, the Mexican government had been denying other people rights too. The further away you got from Mexico City, the less allegiance there was to the Mexican government, honestly. It sort of is like Mr. Lewis's remote control car analogy. The farther you got away from that Mexican government in Mexico City, the less people paid attention to it. And so, it wasn't a problem. They just like, okay, well, we're not going to fight you. So Carney had no trouble taking over the Santa Fe area. And then later, going into California, it was much the same, as you'll see. Because by the time Carney got to California, California had been in open revolt against Mexico, partly because of the same reason as Texas, partly because there had been so many United States citizens that had been flooding into the area, and then one John C. Fremont, who had been whispering in the ears of the locals, oh, you want to become independent, you want to become independent. And then, of course, the very first thing you want to do once you become independent is turn right around and join the United States. So once Carney gets to California, he finds that California has become independent. They are the Bear Flag Republic. And this is why California still has a bear on their flag. So there's no resistance. Carney has a large landmass to be worried about on his part of the plan, but he didn't have heavy fighting. I'm not saying that he didn't have any fighting and that he didn't lose any men, and that it wasn't tough because he's going across the desert, but it was not heavy casualties like some of the other men took. All right, so let's talk about the opposition to the war. This is a picture of Representative Abraham Lincoln when he was a representative to the United States Congress. And many, many people, including Lincoln, who was a Whig at the time, did not agree with the war at all. They felt that Democrats like Polk were just trying to stir up the Mexicans, were trying to create a war with the Mexicans in order to add more southern territory in order to spread slavery across the southern areas. Lots of people felt this way, but not enough, because there was the thing about shooting up American soldiers on American soil. But you need to understand that many people call this President Polk's war, and they were not supportive of it whatsoever. Now, interestingly enough, when Representative Lincoln becomes President Lincoln, his story is slightly different about who causes war and what happens with war. All right, so not long after California has become the Bear Flag Republic, United States warships who had been sent on their way months earlier, because you have to sail all the way around the southern tip of South America, there's no Panama Canal, sail into the ports of San Diego and San Francisco, and they claim California for the United States. It's not a big problem because California doesn't really offer much resistance either. And then I would like to mention a little bit about Winfield Scott, because he's got the part about taking Mexico City. And there's a little picture at the top up here of Scott's troops raising the American flag in Mexico City. And I also have a poster in the back of my classroom, again, about Scott's troops taking Mexico City. Because once you raise your flag in the capital city of the other country, you've pretty much taken control. So most people would imagine that you would have to travel down through the southern or down through southwestern United States and down through Mexico in order to capture Mexico City. You would not think of taking people and landing them at Veracruz like Scott did, and then dragging heavy cannons and ammunition and all the things that you need to wage war against a pretty formidable opponent. The Mexican army is still not anything to be sniffed at. Across the mountains. Mexico City's up in the mountains, and you have to, at Veracruz, you're at sea level, and you have to drag all this stuff up over the mountains. Obviously, in a foreign country where other people know the terrain better. But that is exactly what Polk offered. That's exactly what Scott offered to Polk, and just said, if you give me enough money and enough men and the ships, I can get this done. It really was frowned upon. Most of the people at the time, most of the military minds at the time didn't think Scott would be able to do this thing. But he did and was successful with it. And so I want you to kind of stick that in the back of your brain, because when the Civil War happens, Scott is too old to be taking part in the Civil War, but Lincoln will turn to him for a strategy. All right, once Mexico City is captured, of course, then the Mexican government has to look at surrender negotiations, because once your capital city is taken, you're done. You can't fight on. Okay, so let's look at peace terms. Please look at this map up here. It is the Mexican Cession. It includes all of that southwestern fourth of United States. That is the amount of land that the Mexican government had to give up in this treaty. So here's the thing. The Mexican government gives up that land. It's about 500,000 square miles. It becomes the states of California, Nevada, Utah, Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, and Wyoming. Mexico must accept the Rio Grande as the border with Texas. Again. And any Mexican citizen living inside that cession, which there's considerable. I mean, there have been some, let's face it, there have been some Mexican families, Spanish families before them, especially in California, but also in the area of New Mexico and Arizona, but especially in California. There have been Spanish families that have been living there since the beginning, since like 300 years ago. So those families are old, and any family that's living there is welcome to stay and become U.S. citizens. Okay, and in return, the U.S. is going to pay $15 million to the country of Mexico and assume $3.25 million in debts that Mexico owes any American citizens for any mayhem and havoc they may have stirred up, tromping around on U.S. soil and destroying U.S. property. That does not count the cost of the war. All right, so you might think in your mind, well, he offered them 30 originally, but now he's getting by with paying 15, well, 18.25. But that doesn't count the cost of the war in lives of men, and it doesn't count the cost of the war in the actual price of things in the war. Okay, so that's not counting the total cost of the war. As far as the people staying in the area of California and the other people staying, as far as you are a Mexican citizen, you can become a U.S. citizen. Again, you're far away from Washington, D.C., and you've been living far away from the Mexican government as well, for Mexico City. And for many of these people, not all, but quite a few, it doesn't matter what government you live under, as long as they will leave you alone. As long as they will just leave you ranch your cattle or grow your crops or run your shop or whatever it is, if they will just leave you alone to do your job and have your family, it doesn't really matter what flag it is, okay? So many of them did stay, not all, some of them left and went home. And as you'll see later, some of them are more or less driven off their land, not all, but some. But not everybody leaves and runs away just because the United States has taken over.